let me say thank you to all of my viewers who have reacted to the first programme broadcast by the Scotland channel on the 1st of August. Now, this first programme featuring Scotland's space programme and its space industries has proved to be immensely popular, even in the first 24 hours or so, receiving over 4,000 individual views. This is a good sign, and Peter Gill, the CEO who runs the Scotland channel, has been delighted by a completely glitch-free start to the new paradigm of a Scottish independent television channel. So thank you to everybody who sent in their comments, and in fact just about all of them, except for the usual trolls, have been extremely positive. So stay tuned next month as well for the next major documentary on the independence movement itself, which is to air, I believe, in September. I'll give you more details as I get them. Anyway, back to today's programme. And as usual, I've been monitoring all kinds of UK publications, and one of the ones I like to keep an eye on is the UK Defence Journal, which is often used to break news stories in the public sphere about all kinds of things to do with the United Kingdom's defence industries. Now, it published an article last week showcasing the launch, or should I say the floating out, of one of its latest frigates from the Govan shipyard in Glasgow. But the comment that went with this interested me because it was claiming that there had been, shall we say, comments or rumours or stories that Scotland was not receiving the amount of shipyard contracts which had been promised in 2014. Now, you might remember, if you think back to 2014, at the point where the independence campaign was beginning to gain traction and were drawing level with the No campaign, the British Defence Secretary, in fact, the British, I would say the entire No campaign, the so-called Better Together campaign, claimed that if we didn't vote to stay in the Union, then these shipyard contracts would dry up, that the United Kingdom would stop manufacturing its naval ships in Scottish yards. Now, I said at the time, and I still maintain this, would be a ludicrous thing for BAE Systems, which is the main contractor for building warships in Scotland, would suddenly, after all this time of making massive investments in both the Scotstoun Yard and the Govan Yard for building 13 frigates, would suddenly up sticks and move somewhere else. Now, I can't imagine any multinational arms corporation pulling out of a location where it has invested so much money simply because political leaders decided they didn't want to order ships which had been built in an independent Scotland. Now, it's interesting in a number of ways that this comment has come from the Defence Journal now, because it's now really waving the flag, if you like, for the Union, saying that the jobs that have been created at the Govan Yard are because we voted no. And therefore, these 13 frigates are all going to be built in Govan over the next few years, and several have already been completed. Now, whilst I would accept that creating jobs in this way is a good thing, and from the point of view of the Union, I'm sure it's a major benefit of staying supposedly in the Union. However, it doesn't mean that naval shipbuilding would stop if we became independent, because where else would the United Kingdom be able to build its warships and, more importantly, fit them out with the advanced missile and defence systems that they currently have? Remember that most of this stuff is coming from a company called Thales, which is a French company, but which has major manufacturing bases in Scotland. And they manufacture things like the radar and guidance systems for major missile defence complexes, which are loaded into these awaiting warship hulls. The building of warship hulls can actually happen anywhere. Building a ship is relatively simple compared to the kind of armaments that are fitted. But the idea that the British Navy would suddenly stop building its warships in Scotland and go elsewhere would pose huge problems for the Ministry of Defence. So although these 13 warships will be built on the Clyde and it will provide jobs, and I would accept that BAE Systems is setting up a new shipbuilding academy, particularly in its Scotstoun yard at the moment. They're actually building that facility right now. There's a demonstration that many years after promising these warships would be built here, it's taken more than 12 years for these 13 warships to actually start to be assembled here. So it's taken a very, very long time for BAE Systems to get into gear and actually start doing this. And that is a sign of just how complex it is to build ships like that here. Now, there's another argument about the reason why the United Kingdom wants to build so many surface ships. And I would argue that the major reason why there are so many of these frigates being built is primarily to protect other assets, most notably the two massive aircraft carriers. That is the Queen Elizabeth class carriers, of which there are two, both of which are now sailing into various areas around the world where there are flashpoints. And I think probably the most notable ones are going to be in the Mediterranean to try to protect the eastern flank of Europe from any Russian aggression, but also in the South China Sea, where America and China have been squaring up to each other recently over, shall we say, China's expansionist plans for some of the islands there. But what I'm getting at here is that it wouldn't be necessary to build as many frigates as they built if these two aircraft carriers had been cancelled. Now, the aircraft carriers concerned were originally ordered by Gordon Brown's administration when he was the Labour Chancellor. And because of that, the Tories spent their last two terms in office trying to cancel those contracts before the carriers could be built. But they couldn't, because the contracts had been drawn up in such a way that it would cost more to cancel them than it would to complete them. So that's left the United Kingdom with two extraordinarily vulnerable assets at sea. Massive aircraft carriers are very slow, they're very difficult to protect, but they're also carrying some of the most expensive aviation in the world in the form of F-35 American fighter and attack aircraft. Now, having said all of that, there is another problem which has only become apparent since the Ukrainian war against the Russians, and that is that the Russian surface fleet in Sevastopol harbour, which was controlling access to the Black Sea, was attacked by Ukrainian marine drones, essentially high-powered autonomous speedboats packed with explosives, which have managed to sink or damage over a third of Russia's surface fleet in the Black Sea. Now, given that that has now happened, there's now a unique threat to all the surface ships which have been built by the United Kingdom and other major superpowers like the United States, as well as Russia, obviously, and China. And if those sea drone technologies were to be adopted by any of our, shall we say, opponents, then that puts the entire surface fleet at risk. And there's no real easy defense against such drone boats, given the fact that they use satellite communications to navigate and can hit in swarms, and there's very little that any surface ship can do to sink them other than direct fire from machine guns and light guns aboard ships. Now, it's also important to remember that frigates, which are what we're talking about being built here in Govan, are used for anti-submarine operations, and they are essential to protect other surface vessels from being torpedoed by submarines, and also to protect our waters around our coastline from incursions by, shall we say, aggressive states such as Russia. So they are necessary, but at the same time, they have to be built somewhere. And if they're not going to be built in Scottish yards, where on earth are they going to build them? Anyway, these are the things I'm thinking of, that the surface fleet that the United Kingdom has invested so heavily in is now uniquely vulnerable. And the need for these frigates is really to protect those surface vessels as well as fighting anti-submarine warfare. So the United Kingdom's actually boxed itself into a very expensive corner here by adopting old-style surface warfare type ships in large numbers. Anyway, moving on, they seem to be extremely keen to get over to the people of Scotland that these warships are now being built, as promised over 12, 13 years ago. They finally got around to starting building them. And this is a major benefit of being in the Union. Frankly, I still disagree. I think these ships could and would still have been built here under contract, because if the contract's signed and Scotland leaves the United Kingdom, BAE Systems is still obliged to complete the contracts in its existing warship yards. It can't just suddenly up sticks and build them elsewhere. That would cost them a fortune. Not going to happen. Okay, other news. Independent support is still at a very high level, and in fact it appears to be gradually growing. So despite the fact that the SNP's vote share in terms of United Kingdom elections, and I include Holyrood in that, has taken a short nosedive, independent support has not collapsed at all. In fact, quite the opposite. It has solidified, coalesced, and is starting to increase again. And that shows me that it's not about party politics, independence. It's about a general need and a general desire for independence amongst the population. And that's a very encouraging sign. However, it's left what remained of the SNP's MPs, who were recently unseated in the recent general election, with a difficult task, trying to find new employment after being so handsomely rewarded for their efforts down in London at Westminster. Most notably Mary Black, I would say the SNP's left-wing firebrand, and a very effective politician, incidentally, in her own right, has now decided to take up stand-up comedy. A striking departure, but in a way deeply ironic when you come to think about it, given the fact that Mary Black's opinion of Westminster was that it was a massive comedy stage in the first place, a mere circus, and that the whole thing was ridiculous. So poor Mary is now, I would say, reduced to taking to the stage and trying to get laughs out of this, out of her knowledge and her experience of working in Westminster. And we've also seen the former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, taking up a post with STV as a political pundit. Now, to be fair to Nicola Sturgeon, she didn't look that comfortable as a political pundit. But it just goes to show you really how precarious now it is for the SNP. But they're still sticking to their original approach to independence, talking about it a lot, but never getting around to actually finding a way of achieving it. And that way of achieving it is down really to human rights. The human right to self-determination is the one thing that the United Kingdom does not want to allow Scotland to exercise. So although it claims that we have the right to self-determination, it's equally determined not to allow us to get access to the democratic events necessary to actually exercise that right. And in doing that, they're actually denying our human rights. And that is why Salvo and other groups are currently fighting the legal battle to establish Scotland's right to self-determination in the International Court of Justice, for starters. And that is ongoing as we speak. Now, whilst all that has been happening, you'll be aware that the notorious Tommy Robinson, famous is not the right word, is it? Notorious is a better word to describe Mr. Robinson, is expanding the far right's chaos across England at the moment. The BBC is trying to present this as something which is happening across all four nations. It isn't. It is becoming violent in both England and Northern Ireland simultaneously. These far-right British nationalist nutjobs and thugs are causing trouble everywhere they go. Tommy Robinson has decided to try and import his form of English nationalist lunacy into Glasgow in an effort to counter the pro-independence march, which would be happening simultaneously in Edinburgh. But it's going to flop, and it's going to flop for a very simple reason. The people of Scotland don't care about Tommy Robinson. They don't want to engage in any kind of counter-protest against this idiot. It's actually better, and many people apart from me have said this, if he's simply ignored. The more of us flock to Glasgow to take part in counter-protests, the more chance there is of Mr. Robinson succeeding in his plan to introduce violent insurrection onto our streets as well. However, the peaceful nature of independence campaigning is such that the Independence March, which is happening in Edinburgh, all of the people who would normally be in Glasgow, let's say, at the time of Mr. Robinson's visit, are now going to be in Edinburgh protesting peacefully and marching for independence, while Mr. Robinson and his thugs, all 6 or 7 of them, are probably going to be left surrounded by police and basically being ignored by the entire population of Glasgow, because nobody cares about Mr. Robinson or his politics, and they certainly don't want to engage with them or give him the satisfaction of starting any violent confrontations. And that just leaves our poor Scottish police officers to face these idiots themselves. Now, I feel sorry for Police Scotland having to do this, but then that is their job. And I really hope that they're successful in doing it and manage to arrest Mr. Robinson and all of his chums for the kind of violent thuggery and abuse that they're famous for. So in the round, I think, at the moment, we are going through a kind of interregnum, a sort of pregnant political pause in Scotland while things are reset. But what's being reset the most is the high levels of support for Scottish independence across the country. And I predict that's going to get greater and greater. It's edging upwards as we speak. It's certainly been over 51% for quite a long time. And I'd be willing to bet, as the English Nationalist thuggery spreads across the rest of the United Kingdom, and I'm talking about Wales and Northern Ireland here, where this kind of stuff is more normal, shall we say, or at least is more prevalent, Scotland is going to go a completely different way. We're going to simply ignore it. We've got our own fight on our hands, and our fight is for our own liberation from what is effectively a colony. So at the moment, I think things are looking pretty good for Scotland. I don't see any chance that warship building in Scotland would stop if we became independent, because where else is the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defence going to find the same level of skill? And why else would, or why on earth would BAE Systems, which is a British company after all, up sticks, move somewhere else, costing billions and billions of pounds to do it, just simply because some politicians in London said they should? I don't see that happening. It's not the way the world works. So anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. I'm glad to be back. I had a very pleasant day on Thursday. It was my wedding anniversary. My wife and I managed to escape for a whole day up to Pitlochry, where we were, I suppose we were there amongst hundreds or thousands of English bus tourists who were milling about the village while we were there. But funnily enough, these tourists, who seem to be mostly in the older age bracket, were mostly sitting sipping coffee, eating ice cream, but actually not really enjoying the scenery. We had a very long walk around Loch Fiscally through the woods, and it was deserted. We had a fantastic time. And yet, back to the town of Pitlochry, it's absolutely humming with activity. Couldn't find a parking space initially either. But anyway, we had a great day out, and I'm glad to say I'm feeling a bit refreshed and recharged as a result. It's good to know that we can still travel up to the Highlands so quickly and easily up the jewelled A9. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. As I say, keep watching the New Scotland channel. There will be other programmes being made. This is just the beginning, incidentally. And I would like to invite anybody who is already making their own video blogs in their own part of Scotland, who supports independence, to get in touch with Scotland 24. We're looking for anybody who is currently making their own mini documentaries or their own news reports from their own local areas to actually get in touch with us. We want to include everybody, all of these citizen journalists that we currently have, in the team. At the moment, obviously nobody is going to get paid for this, not least me, but as the channel progresses and as the advertising revenue starts to come in, then we will be able to start paying various contributors for their work. But that is a slow burn. It's going to take time. We already have some good contacts with people like Kevin Gibney, who runs Independence Live, and many other bloggers in the independence movement who are already been in touch, but we need more. And the more we get, the more we can put on the channel, and the more we can see this on a regular basis. Everybody so far has been delighted by the first documentary, and it is of a high quality. At the moment, you may have noticed that the voiceover in the first documentary is an AI voice. It's not a normal human voice. And that is simply at the moment because of costs, and because we need more voiceover artists. So if you have a good voice and you like doing voiceovers, get in touch as well. We might be able to use your talents later on. Anyway, that's it from me today. Have a great day, have a great week. But remember, independence support is gaining ground all the time, despite what has happened to the SNP. And no matter what happens in the sphere of, shall we say, parliamentary politics, both at Holyrood and in London, it makes no difference to the support for independence. In fact, quite the opposite. It's having an upward push on independence. The more chaos there is in the United Kingdom, the stronger the motivation there is to leave it. Anyway, keep the faith, and I'll see you later in the week. Bye for now.